It reminds me of history repeats itself. And that's what I want to talk about today, which is this thing we always refer to in supply chain is the bullwhip effect. And we wrote about this back in March of 2020. We said, look, when we shut the global economy down and we shut down factories and we shut down businesses, that once the pandemic is over, now factories are going to start up, and so you're going to struggle to get people, you're going to struggle to get material, and then after that's all done, then you're going to struggle to get transportation, containers, boats, ships, trains, trucks, and then those companies are going to struggle. And so there's kind of this bullwhip effect that, you get to a peak and then you can't ship because you can't get the truck, and then you finally get the trucks and then you can't get the drivers, and that bullwhip effect happens across the globe happened as a result of the pandemic. But it's as clear a natural law as laws of physics, laws of gravity, laws of economics, laws of human nature. It's as clear as any of those that this bullwhip effect impacts a lot of upstream and downstream in the supply chain sort of partners. So I'll give you a great example. And this example is about the theater industry in New York City. And so if you ever want to go see great theater, everybody knows you go to London or you go to New York City. This is where you have the biggest number of shows, the highest budgets. By the way, if anybody ever wants to learn a little bit about the business side of Broadway, there's a number of great articles that have been written and some great books have been written. Basically, some playwright comes up with a great idea, finds a money person. That money person then finds a lot of money, mostly from wealthy patrons that don't seem to mind losing it. The venture capital industry is almost 10 times more successful than Broadway is. And the venture capital industry will tell you that, maybe 1 out of 7 of their investments really make all their returns for them. Broadway is a terrible business, but it's driven by something other than just pure economics. So for every, Cats or Rent or Phantom of the Opera that you have hundreds of others that never, ever return the capital that was invested in them. And so they too experienced the bullwhip effect. So what happened after the pandemic was over now, and all the shows have been shut down for nearly 2 years, now all of a sudden this season, Broadway is just flooded with new shows. It was a great article in a kind of a journal that a lot of the theater folks read in New York and around the country called Hyperallergic. And this great writer actually goes through what has happened. And so guess what? So now everybody's coming. There's not enough theaters for all the pent-up shows. A lot of the creative types, what they did in 2020 and 2021 was they came up with new shows in their heads and on paper. They couldn't produce them. They couldn't staff them. They couldn't put them in a theater. They couldn't do anything, but they came up. And so there's now a backlog of shows ready to be produced, but there's a finite number of theaters. And so, by the way, the only entity in the entire supply chain of theaters in Broadway, the only entity in that whole food chain that makes any money is, on a normal basis, is the theater owner. Because the theater owners get, $20,000 to $50,000 a week rent for the theater, plus they get about 7% of the gross proceeds of the shows. And so they make money. Their property taxes and everything are paid whether the show is a good one or not. Nevertheless, now there's not enough theaters, and so they're trying to jockey around to use other second tier sort of theaters, even for first tier, at least thought of first tier type of shows. And of course now they need sets. So now you have all these sets. Guess what? During the pandemic, a lot of the set design companies owned by older families just said enough's enough, and they sold off all the equipment. So now there's not enough set production equipment to put on shows in Broadway. By the way, same thing is happening in London as well. And so now they're starting to rehab shows and rehab old sets and refurbish old sets to be used. Also, this is a testament to the innovation of human beings. They've now there's a big push for those minimalistic sort of shows where you have just a few actors and you have minimalistic sort of sets, and it really drives the creative talent to make the talent become the show purely and 100%, and not just the pageantry of the show. So if anybody's ever seen Cats or Phantom of the Opera or Miss Saigon, you know that the sets are extremely expensive and they're magnificent and they're wonderful. Well, if you can't get set designers and if you can't get the carpenters to build the sets, and there's only so many old sets in warehouses that can be refurbished, you have to start thinking of innovative ways. And interestingly enough, it turns out some of these minimalistic sort of shows are now doing extremely well. In fact, there's some belief that because of the pandemic, more focus on Broadway will be in the next year to 3 years will be on the superiority of acting skills and the superiority in a minimalistic set than in the big pageantry sort of approaches of the last decade and a half. And so, interestingly enough, the supply chain and the bullwhip effect within supply chain impacts not just factories, not just distribution companies, not just retailers, but it's come to Broadway in a big way. And the geniuses and the creative talents of Broadway are starting to figure out by questioning the very fabric of what a show is and finding other ways, sometimes a compromised approach and sometimes a completely new thought of way to present entertainment because of the fact that they can't get the carpenters, they can't get the lighting designers, they can't get the things that they need to put on the types of shows that they used to think they wanted. And as one producer said in the article that I'm referring to, said, now we're looking at talent on the stage more than talent in the producer's head and talent in the carpentry shop. We're looking at talent on the stage that are standing there on the stage. And I think that is proof that sometimes good things come out of bad things in a magnificent, wonderful sort of way. So, by the way, they're also not raising ticket prices very much, a little bit, but not much, because again, they run this economic model that's very precarious to start with. And particularly in a recession and an inflation environment, the disposable incomes are less. So Broadway, to their credit, are trying to keep a lid on the already exorbitantly high ticket prices they pay, but they're really trying to focus on talent to bring people in. Supply chain never ends.